Good evening. Right now, Metro Police are desperately searching for the person or people responsible for killing a man and a woman.
And I got a male down in the middle of the street.
Breaking news now, a triple shooting leaves 2 dead.
Never expect for somebody to tell you your loved one was murdered.
This Labor Day will mark 42 years that have haunted the St. Cloud family.
30 years. 30 years this family has waited for answers.
A couple months go by, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you really start to struggle with the idea that the case might not get solved and that somebody might get away with murder.
It's very unfortunate that we have any cold cases at all, and certainly unfortunate that we have as many as we do. And that's why Ryan's work and the work of Project Cold Case is so important.
All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us again. We have the wonderful Katie Jeffries from First Coast News.
Hello, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming back and joining us. We've been trying to do a Facebook Live every week, and one of the things we wanted to do was go back and revisit some of the unsolved segments that you've been doing for over a year now, I believe.
I think like a year and a half?
Yeah. So it was, it's time to a lot of those cases hadn't been in the public eye in a long time.
Yeah.
You were able to bring them back into the public eye. And now it's been a while, so we want to bring them back in and make sure that all the people that maybe didn't know we were doing these before, that you were doing them before, gets the opportunity to view them. Today we're going to talk about, just kind of one of the wildest, craziest stories we've dealt with.
It was, because it was a series that focused around 5 girls that went missing within a 3-month period in 1974. So it was kind of, essentially it was 4 different cases, because there was an instance where there were 2 sisters that went missing at the same time. So it was like 4 separate cases that we were trying to tell, in which none of them there'd been no arrests, and only, I believe, 2 bodies were ever found.
And we had a hard time getting family members
right.
of a lot of these. It was 1974. Some of the families moved away.
Others
right after it happened.
Passed away.
Others had passed away, and we'll talk about some of those. But it made it difficult to tell the whole story. And then we had people reach out to us afterwards, after the stories aired, that said, "Oh, this was my friend. I grew up with them," and stuff like that. We had a little. Your station did a little teaser trailer for the series, because you did a 5-day series on this case, and every day you talked about
it was a different story, and then at the end we did kind of a summary about what was similar in the cases, what was different. So the station was, of course, very interested in the story. So they put together kind of a promo to let people know what was coming up.
Yeah, and because these segments that you were doing were between 3.5, 5 minutes. They were long. So typically we will show the segment that you did during our Facebook Live, but I have a feeling this one's going to go for a little while anyway.
We'd be here for
and
like
that
a half
30
hour.
minutes of just watching. So what we're going to do is we're going to post the link to your story in the comments that has each individual segment within it, so that people can go back and watch them, later. But we do want to show the teaser just to kind of give an idea what your station did, what you did.
1974. 5 little girls go missing.
Disappeared without a trace.
Are the killings connected or coincidence? My detectives won't forget. Unsolved. The Vanishing. Starting Monday, only on First Coast News at 6.
All right, so that was the teaser, that bumper. I don't know, what do y'all call it?
Teaser.
Yeah.
Promo.
A promo as you were leading up to the segment, the series. And this was, I think it was back in May.
Yeah, it was. It was May of last year that we did these.
Yeah, May of last year. So to kind of give the people out there a little background on each case, and we'll just kind of see how this flows, because there's so much going on.
Yeah, so stay with us, because there is a lot of detail in each story to kind of make you understand what matches, what didn't match.
Yeah, exactly. And if there's questions come in, Clint's here. He's moderating the comments. He'll let us know. But we did have one of the victims' family members just, I don't know, maybe coincidentally reach out today and comment on the post from back in May. So I made sure she knew that we were going to be doing this today, and hopefully, get that information back out again. But to start us off, July 21st,
yes,
1974.
Right.
Even before I was born. So
Yeah.
there's no one in the studio right now that was alive then. But Jean Marie Schoen,
Right, 9 years old,
went by Jeannie with her family. She's walking to a grocery store, convenience store. I think that one was really close to her.
It was only, I want to say, 2 blocks from her house. And they lived just kind of north of downtown. I don't know if it was technically Springfield yet. But that's kind of where they were.
It's that area of town, and I think her mother was out of town.
Yes.
She was staying at her grandmother's house.
Her uncle. I think her uncle was watching her.
And her uncle asked her to run to the store
and get a pack of cigarettes. Which, I mean, of course, that catches you off guard nowadays because that's unheard of. But you have to keep in mind in 1974, that wasn't an uncommon errand for a child to, like, here's some money, run down, pick up a pack of cigarettes.
Right.
And the store owner remembered she came in, she bought the cigarettes, but she then left her change on the counter. So she walks out, comes back to get the change, mentions that she's going down to this place called the Hangout, which was kind of like a pinball machine arcade
place.
The detective spoke to that man who said that she made it there, but that the floors had just been cleaned, so they weren't open, and they told her to come back later. And that was kind of the last official sighting of her. After that, there were two young girls who I think were either friends of hers or they knew her, but they were young, so they were around her age, who said that they saw her at a laundromat. And this is kind of where it gets weird. So the two girls say that they saw her at that laundromat, which was near the Winn-Dixie in the Springfield area, when a man approached them on a blue bike. Now, they say that he grabbed Jeannie and he pulled her into the restroom. And when she came out, Jeannie was crying. The man then rode away with her on the bike, and that the girls tried to run after them but could not keep up. So what jumped out when we spoke to Detective Dan Jansen about this, he said what jumped out to him in the report was that the girls never said she screamed, never yelled for help. So you have to wonder, like, maybe did she know this person? She knew that person,
right? She was described as feisty in a number of the articles, and so you think,
that she would have fought back if this was a stranger.
Right. Especially with friends around or people that knew her around. That was just kind of the beginning of this series of abductions or disappearances that became complicated. Again, you hit on it. I want people to remember that this is 1974. So we're going to say some things that people now would think maybe would be odd. Yeah. But in 1974... you would send your kids to go to the store, grocery store, convenience store, buy cigarettes. That was not uncommon. It was not uncommon for a 9-year-old to be allowed to go a couple of blocks away.
Right.
So I don't, it's always important to remember to put yourself back in that time before. I don't want anybody making any judgmental comments about, sending 9-year-old Jeannie. That's not what we're doing here.
And her mom was, heartbroken. You look back at the articles from 1974, she took out ad after ad in the paper, begging. This is actually a picture from the article in the, I think it was Jacksonville Journal, begging someone to please return her if they had information about her. But she was not only in newspaper articles, she was paying for advertisements with Jeannie's photo.
She came up with $1,000 reward, which at the time was, pretty big reward. And I remember reading some of the articles with her in it, and she had gone on vacation, which is something she had never done. So she blamed herself for not being there, when her daughter was abducted. Not that would have had any bearing on it, but she has since passed. I think you were able to
we
do
found
some
her
research.
Obituary, unfortunately, so we couldn't speak to her.
She never was able to see resolution in this case. It obviously was destroyed her, and I can't remember if they were the ones that moved out of town immediately after. It may have been one of the other girls, and I know that it had such a big impact on a number of these families that they didn't stick around.
Especially to not even they never even found her body. They never found out what happened after that. So she never got really any type of resolution about what happened after her daughter was last seen at the hangout.
I remember one of her quotes was, children don't just disappear, and that's seemingly what happened to her daughter. She vanished and has not been found. Her remains, nothing has ever been resolved in the case. less than 2 weeks later.
Yep, it was August 1st. So the first abduction was July 21st, and then the next abductions, because these were sisters, was August 1st. And these are the two girls. It was Annette and Millette Anderson.
Yeah, Millette was 6, and Annette was 11, I believe. And they lived in a different part of town.
Right. I think
Jeannie
more like
shown,
the Ocean Way-ish
yeah,
area.
and out towards, north side of Jacksonville, but out towards the beach a little bit. I mean, I did a map of all these locations today, and they were really out there. I mean, you know, it was off the beaten path, really, to get to their house. But they were home alone, and just kind of this fluke
kind of incident. Yeah, that's why you wonder, like, how did somebody who they're back off this kind of beaten path, so it'd be hard to observe their house. How would they know this very small window of time?
Yeah.
Because so we actually spoke to their sister.
You spoke to their sister.
Their older sister Donna. She said that there was a sick family member that she and their mother were going to go tend to, but their dad was coming back from fishing.
Right.
They knew he was going to be back soon, so
no cell phones again. It's 1974.
Right.
You
so
know.
they knew dad was going to be back soon, and the girls were at the house, so they went to go take care of this sick family member, and the girls were at the house. Now, the father, Jack, he did call at about 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
Because he had just gotten back from fishing, spoke to them on this phone. He spoke to Annette, and he heard the dog barking in the background, and he specifically asked, what is the dog barking at?
Right.
And she said birds, that the dog sees birds.
Yeah.
He says, okay, I'll be home soon, they hang up. He called again about 20 minutes later, and there was no answer.
Right.
So they believe it was within that 20-minute frame that this happened.
Yeah, and this was another one of those that he's a commercial fisherman. He doesn't have a phone, but he's expected to be home about the time mom and sister leave to go take care of this relative, and he calls, and then they know there's this 20-minute window from when he speaks to the children and when he calls back and they're not there. When he gets home, he immediately notices that the girls aren't there.
And the dog was locked up in a back
room.
room.
The dog is locked up in the back room, and Millette's baby doll, I think, is not, which she didn't.
Never. They said she never went anywhere without it, and that was gone.
So that was troublesome. Donna, the sister, tells you that there's no way that dog would have just let anybody into the house. The fact that it was locked up in the back indicated almost that it was somebody the dog knew or recognized.
Or just that the dog wouldn't have let anything happen to Annette, that dog loved Annette specifically. So she's like, the girls would never have put the dog in the back room.
Yeah. That's what
that had to be the work of someone else, because they never locked up the dog.
And this just makes this so complicated, because now you've got 3 young girls between the ages of 6 and 11 that have gone missing in a less than 2 weeks period, like 11 days. They're about 20 miles apart, these two incidents. This one particularly is way off the beating path. What are the odds that somebody just happens upon a house with 2 young girls, that's out there looking to abduct 2 young girls, and happens upon this house?
And when I spoke to Donna, she said repeatedly that, there was only one way in, one way out of where their house was, because it was very much off the beaten path. So they were. It's just not, like where you drive down a neighborhood and like, oh, there's a house. Like, they were back off of the road.
Yeah. And
someone did report seeing a white car in their driveway, but nothing really came of that, unfortunately. So with this case, it kind of got more and more complicated, because there was a man who was going through Jacksonville at that time named, I believe it was John Paul Knowles.
Yeah.
And he was a serial killer. And he actually wrote a letter before he was killed during an escape attempt, where he confessed to killing the Anderson sisters. But there were several details that investigators say didn't match up with what actually happened. And
he tells where he dumps the bodies, according to him.
Yeah.
I think those transcripts, he has these transcripts. This guy was traveling. He was in his car constantly going back and forth from Georgia and Florida and all over the country and killing people. And he would record his killings, audio recording on a cassette tape, and then he sent them all to his attorney, and they transcribed them. And one of those he describes, but I believe memory serves, he says he pulls up and he sees these two girls out there, and he thought he knew them or they recognized him or something, and that's why he abducted them. So he claims that he kills them and he dumps them off of Commonwealth Avenue
out on the west side.
And so there was a
huge search,
massive search out of that area, and no remains were ever found.
Right. So I know when we did this story, Detective Jansen said he's very skeptical of that story because Knowles also was someone who wanted that high kill number.
Notoriety. He would exaggerate, I think is what Sergeant Jansen said. He would exaggerate some of his killings and some of the things he was doing. And I think at the time, law enforcement took Knowles at his word that he did it. And not that they necessarily closed the case, but I think they pretty much attributed the Anderson sisters' disappearance and death to him, or maybe a little bit later on. But that tied into a serial killer. I mean, it certainly was something they had to look into. I mean, how at that time does Knowles know that these girls have been missing? Well, he was from Jacksonville or lived in Jacksonville, and it was on the news, and it was in the newspapers. So it wouldn't have been hard for him to have known about it, but they were never able to prove that. And then he was killed in Georgia, I think, by police officers. They were trying to escape.
There were multiple serial killers that came through this area during that time, right?
Well, Jacksonville has seen its fair share of serial killers that came through here. We'll talk about there was a connection possibly to Ted Bundy in these cases, but through a little more research, Ted Bundy,
he wasn't in Florida at
that time. But Ted Bundy's last victim was a 12-year-old girl, I think, in Lake City, and he killed her with a knife that he had purchased in Jacksonville the day before. Oh, and by the way, he tried to abduct a girl in Jacksonville that day before who happened to be the daughter of one of the investigators
of these cases. So it's like, it's crazy.
But it was 4 years later.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the way this web, you can see why investigators were beating their heads against the wall trying to solve these cases and get answers and find these girls. The three that we've talked about were never recovered.
No, and I felt so bad, when we interviewed Donna and we heard about her parents. Elizabeth and Jack, they lived in the same house with the same phone number until the day they died, hoping that maybe the girls were alive by some miracle.
Yeah.
But they just didn't. They never moved. They never changed their phone number.
The dad, they said, he refused to believe that they were dead, and he expected a call from his daughters pretty much every single night. He thought that he was going to get that call from his daughters, or his daughters had been found. When he passed away, which was in 1994, like 20 years later, I think then Mom did erect a headstone.
She did,
and a small cemetery out there.
But she did stay in that house as well.
She stayed in that house as well. I think in some interviews I read that she did believe they were gone, but she wanted to find them and be able to give a proper burial. I know the headstone is the shape of a heart or two hearts, and it says missing since August 1, 1974.
Yeah.
And their birth dates are on there, but there's no date of death because
they don't know.
Because they didn't know, and they weren't sure, so they didn't want to go that far. I mean, heartbreaking. When you met with their sister Donna, I mean, she had pictures, and they had
their schoolwork, their report cards that her mother had given her before she passed away, so that somebody in the family would have it. But yeah, it's in the little school pictures. So it was so sad.
And you think about, a lot of times we try to do this for the families. The families reach out to us, and they want their story told, and so we try to do as many of those as possible. This scenario, we started these without family members because this was an important story to tell, and each one of these victims deserved justice and deserved their story out there publicly again. I mean, my mom was 16 years old when this was happening, and she lived right down the street from, I think, the next victim Virginia. We're going to talk about, Virginia Helm. And when I was telling her that we were doing this, she had no recollection of this. Now you think about a 16-year-old probably isn't watching the news every single night,
Yeah.
you know what I mean, and reading the paper. But she was also just barely out of that range, you know, where she was in this, you know, a 12-year-old was the 12-year-old was the oldest girl.
6-year-old was the youngest.
6-year-old was the youngest. So, you know, she wasn't that much older, you know, than the oldest girl and lived down the street. But she didn't really, you know, remember any of this happening. And again, I think that's probably says more about her age than the publicity it received. But my point, we wanted to get these stories back out there, and luckily we were able to identify some friends and family members and help you know, get these stories back out there. But the cases are important no matter what, and you know, that's why we do some of these where maybe we don't have a family member interviewed on the story, but we still are looking for answers. I mean, that had to be a very scary time to be living in Jacksonville.
It
and
was.
if you had children,
Yeah,
particularly.
What I found interesting, because we went through the Jacksonville Library's microfilm to try and find some of these old articles.
Yeah.
The first, with Jeannie, there's only one story that we could ever find about Jeannie. With the Anderson sisters, there were a couple stories here and there, but it wasn't front page. It was, you know, kind of buried in the paper. Then Virginia, it wasn't front page yet, I don't believe. It was still kind of in the paper. By the time Rebecca went missing, then it was front page.
News. Yeah.
And even then, in the articles, they were asking, do you think it's connected? And detectives back then were saying no.
Right.
And so I think it just, because they weren't connecting them, it didn't get as much press as it, and nowadays we have social media and national news and newswire,
Right,
so it's
right.
easier to send out information faster to other outlets and national, so things get picked up. Whereas back then, this really didn't leave kind of the web of Jacksonville.
Right, and I think, you know, Sergeant Jansen says it in one of your stories. You know, they couldn't connect them, but the thinking is, when's the last time 5 girls went missing in
Right.
3 months in one city, and they weren't.
It was
connected?
uncanny.
Like it. I mean, it's So there was definitely, while they couldn't connect it, they had to be thinking the whole time.
Yeah.
Like there's got to be a connection.
What's the
here.
common thread here?
Yeah. What? It can't be coincidence that this is all happening in such a short period of time. And so then, you know, a little time goes by. About
almost 2 months.
Almost 2 months. The end of September, Virginia Helm disappears again.
Walking
Going
to
to
the
a store.
She'd been sent there to get some soap.
Yeah. This was off of Dean Road, which is kind of on the south side of Jacksonville. But, you know, for the people watching now or later, Virginia Helm is off Dean Road, which is south side. Jeannie Schoen is kind of Springfield area. There's probably about 10 miles between them, maybe a little less. But then the last girl kind of ends up being right in the middle of both of those locations, so that both of the Jeannie Schoen and Virginia Helm end up being within a 5-mile radius of the last girl, Rebecca Green, to go missing.
Yep.
Which now you're starting to
There's more of an area. Yeah.
Tight area. Again, the Anderson sisters are 20 miles away still, which is, you know, in a rural
and we're
area.
actually at their house. They weren't walking anywhere.
They weren't walking anywhere. So you start to see a little bit of difference, which probably, again, plays into these detectives going, how are they connected? How could it possibly be that all 5 go missing in 3 months and it's connected, when we are having a few of these discrepancies? I had to be very frustrating. I'm sure it still is, because the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office was taking another look at these cases,
Right.
and testing some evidence from them, and we haven't heard back one way or the other if anything has led anywhere. But you can see how it would be a very difficult and frustrating case.
Well, especially if it was one person or a group of people, you want those people caught, obviously. So Virginia Helm was 12 years old, so she was kind of on the older scale
Right.
of the girls. Between 6 and 12 were their ages. She was 12 years old. Walking to the store, her dad, in the police notes, after about 45 minutes, started to get really worried, alerted police that she hadn't come back. And there were people interviewed, and what's interesting is this might be the only instance where there's actually maybe a witness.
Right.
So somebody said, I believe it was 3 days. So 3 days after she disappeared, witnesses told police that they saw a car that was off on the side of the road, that it was a VW Bug. It was kind of in northwest Jacksonville, I believe. So
kind of near the Nassau County border is what.
So like far opposite side of town. 3 days later, but that they went up because this car was on the side of the road. You know, people were friendly back then, or you had car trouble. And they saw a girl who was on the floorboards of the car with her hands kind of on the seat. They said wide eyes. Pupils dilated, and eyes looking back and forth like she was afraid, but she didn't scream out. She didn't yell. And the person who was with her, it was a man, got back in the car, took off. And again, you don't have cell phones, so now they have to go find a payphone, tell them what they saw.
Now that one's a bag fell out of the car.
Right, so they're retesting that for DNA, fingerprints.
Right. They had tested it for fingerprints, I guess, back then and not gotten anything, so they were trying to do some more testing on that. And this is where the Ted Bundy,
right, with the bug
kind of came in. Virginia Helms 12, Kimberly Leach is the 12-year-old victim in Lake City. So there was same age. I think most people think of Ted Bundy as always older victims, college age or whatever, but Kimberly Leach was the youngest victim of his known, but she was 12, Virginia's 12, and this bug. But through some more research, and it wasn't really hard because Ted Bundy was killing women in Washington State. He was enrolled in school in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I think he had raped and murdered a woman, I think an still unidentified hitchhiker in Idaho, like all in the same time span where this is going on in Jacksonville, Florida. So, hard pressed, I think they were able to eliminate Bundy, but you can see,
why they kind of thought
they thought so, especially when none of these were solved, and 4 years later, here he is in Jacksonville trying to abduct young girls and killing somebody 60 miles away. And Clint just showed me that Virginia's sister is watching right now, right, Clint? She's watching us, and she thanked us for trying to get the information out there, and so we're it's not that we're happy to do it, because obviously these are terrible, tragic stories, but it's important to do it, and we want to help. So thank you for watching and knowing, that we do care, and that we have done this. I mean, like I said, Katie's stories ran in May of last year. We wanted to get them back out there and try to get a little more publicity. And again, maybe somebody saw something. I remember somebody reaching out after the stories aired and saying that somebody had attempted to abduct her.
Well, we found her.
Yeah.
So I was looking through different kind of obituary sites, because I was actually trying to track down family members.
Right.
And I didn't have any luck back then of tracking down any family, but I did see a comment from a young woman named Mary Ann, who spoke about how she knew her from school. So I was able to search her name, find a phone number, which just by luck, that phone number worked. And she was willing to talk to us, who said that around that same time, I think it was the day before, a person in a VW Bug had approached her.
Yeah.
And that she lived not far from where Virginia was. She ran away, told her mom about it. But she said that she didn't feel like authorities took it that seriously back then, until after Virginia went missing, and then she was kind of interviewed. And we did connect her back up with JSO during these stories, so that way they have her information and they can talk to her again.
And we had a separate person come forward and say that she was not supposed to have left her house, but her and her brother would sneak off to the convenience store and buy stuff, and that she had snuck to the convenience store with her brother knowing about it, and was almost abducted, and her brother came up on there and kind of helped out.
Oh,
and
you didn't tell me that.
I didn't tell you this.
You didn't tell me about this.
I had to give it to JSO because they didn't call authorities at the time because they were afraid they were going to get in trouble for being.
And this
out
was
of the
around
house.
the same time
and
frame.
This was she couldn't really remember the exact dates, and she couldn't really remember what kind of. It wasn't a VW Bug. There was a lot. It was. 1974. Young, she was young, or around that time, and like I said, they didn't call police because they didn't want to get in trouble. They didn't know it was connected to all of this, obviously, and we don't know that either. But I think now looking back, it's something that
Definitely something to follow up
on. And so, yeah, we gave all that information to the sheriff's office in hopes that they could do something with it now. But I remember her saying, we weren't allowed to leave the house, so we would have gotten in trouble for going to the store and getting something. So my brother convinced me not to say anything so that we didn't get in trouble. Hopefully JSO is able to do something with that information as well.
So Virginia, her case though, she was the first out of all of these where they actually were able to find her body.
Yeah.
So it was two people who were actually out walking. According to articles, they were looking for pine cones.
Yeah, just about a month later, I think.
Yeah, stumbled across her remains
near UNF campus, which was not far. Kind of imagining 1974 Jacksonville and Beach Boulevard, there was a lot of woods.
Yeah, it wasn't nearly developed like it is now. It was just kind of a wooded area.
And so they were somewhere over there searching for pine cones for Christmas decorations or something, and they found her remains. Again, no cell phones.
Yep. So then they have to go back.
And then then take somebody back to where this is, because it's not like they have a GPS. They didn't drop a pin on their phone, so detectives know where to go. And unfortunately, they discover
it was Virginia.
It was Virginia's body. She had been shot in the head with a .22 caliber gun, I believe, and buried in a shallow grave or partially buried.
Yeah, I think only partially buried in the dirt. And that's how they were able to see her when they found her body.
Yeah.
There was an extensive search of that area because, of course, they're keeping in mind. They still the Anderson sisters they hadn't been able to locate. They still had Jeannie Schoen they hadn't been able to locate. So they extensively searched this large wooded area off of it was Beach Boulevard and Beechwood.
Beechwood, yeah.
And they didn't find anything.
And they couldn't find anything. And they, like you said, they had horses,
dogs,
ATVs, dogs. I'm sure they thought we found the dump site where we're going to find all these girls, and then
unfortunately nothing.
That was the only one. But then I think that's probably the turning point within the city. I would guess that's
when they did change the way they did missing persons. They started putting them under the homicide division instead of...
They broke them out. And so I think it was just like patrol would handle missing persons or missing children. And so there were some changes within the agency. I think that's probably when citizens of the community really started
to become front page.
Now you found a 12-year-old's body in the woods that has been shot.
Yeah.
So this isn't that's some detectives in every single story I saw. They constantly said these were not runaways. They were not delinquent children. Every single one of them was the majority of them were known to be in loving households, taken care of, had never run away before,
didn't have disciplinary
issues. It was not a scenario where that was an issue they were concerned about. They were pretty sure that somebody had taken these girls from the moment they disappeared, but I'm sure that was devastating. The investigators, I know in some of the articles, reading some of their quotes, one of them had children. Yeah, one of them had a young daughter that ended up the one almost abducted by Ted Bundy. So it was a very difficult time, I'm sure.
I remember in one of the articles what really stuck with me, because I tried to track down this officer to speak to him, and he had since passed away, was they talked about the way they were trying to kind of excavate her body. And because it's 1974, it's not forensics like it is now, they were doing it by hand. And so he talked about he had a daughter the same age and how devastating it was to have to do this by hand to make sure they didn't disturb her body or any evidence, and how tough that was.
Yeah, and I think she was found only in a shirt.
Only in a blouse,
Only in a blouse. But by that time, forensically, they just didn't have the technology they have now anyway. So I'm sure that was very, very hard on them. A few weeks later, again, 3 weeks later, Rebecca Ann Green disappears.
12 years old.
Again, 12, and again, walking to the store.
Right, which was only 5 blocks from her home.
And this is the one that kind of ties the Jeannie Schoen and the Virginia Helm cases together geographically. If you take Rebecca Green's home, it's like 4 miles, or 5 miles to where Jeannie Schoen disappeared, and like 4 or 5 miles to where Virginia Helm disappeared. And again, when I'm looking at the map today and it's saying 4 miles, those were probably relatively the same ways they would travel in 1974. When I looked from Rebecca Green's house to the Anderson sisters, it was like 20 miles now.
Yeah, the Anderson sisters are still kind of the outlier.
Still kind of way out there. And I think that back then in 1974, it probably was even further drive-wise, just because of the roads that were available and speed limits and stuff like that. So they still end up just way out here, kind of isolated from themselves. But Rebecca Green went to the store, and they know that she made it to the store.
Right. The clerk saw her.
The clerk saw her. There's witnesses of her in the store. She never makes it home.
Exactly. After she leaves that store, then that's where no one knows what happened to her at that point. So her body was eventually found as well, but it wasn't found until 3 years later. So her body, she went missing in 1974, but she was found in actually 1977. Yeah. She was actually located off of Fort George Island, which was near the mouth of the St. Johns River, which was a very isolated area. A fisherman happened to stumble upon her remains.
So that was about 25 miles from where
she... Yeah, that's very far.
It was very far. So then that throws the wrench in the geography thing. You know what I mean? And the crazy thing that when I was looking at the map, so Fort George Island and where the Anderson sisters are is probably only about 5 miles away from it, where as the crow flies, like directly, but there's no direct path.
There's like no road to get
There's
you there.
no road to get. There's waterways, and there's the Timuquana, historical and ecological preserve. And it's like a 19-mile drive, but it's only like 5 miles away if you were to cut through the woods and over the river and and through that stuff. But that was interesting. I mean, she was way far away from where she went missing, and that was another thing that just really, I'm sure, complicated the matters. And it was a fisherman.
It was a fisherman who found her body. Again, then had to go report it to police. With Rebecca's case. They said when I spoke to her sister, who contacted us right before the series aired, so unfortunately we didn't get time to be able to put her in and actually interview her. She said that Rebecca was a sweet girl. Again, no disciplinary issues, no problems like that. A nice young girl, and just they were devastated, of course, when she went missing, and then eventually when her body was found. But she was the fifth in 3 months, so of course by then detectives are hyper vigilant about there's something going on. Yeah. But there'd been no arrests.
No arrests. We talked about Knowles, the serial killer, Paul John Knowles. We talked about Ted Bundy. There was another guy listed in some newspaper stores, and he was arrested because he was at the store where Rebecca Green was last seen. He was questioned, and he was arrested on 2 counts of lewd and lascivious assault, but on 2 other minors. Had nothing to do with these 5 girls. He was questioned extensively. I think one of the articles I read said 6 hours one day, and they were interviewing him again the next day. Never charged him with any of these, never linked him, as far as I know, to any of these.
No, not that we know either.
That we were able to discover from our conversations with law enforcement. But that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
As far as suspects go.
And we chose not to name him in the stories because he was never charged with the involvement.
We have no proof that he was involved. We saw an article that said he was at the store and that he was arrested on 2 other counts.
But never connected to the disappearances.
I know that the article said they questioned him extensively. But I mean, that was, as far as we've been told, that was it. As far as anybody that was even potentially a person of interest, that they wanted more information from, that's a lot of investigating going on in 5 cases, and really
with various detectives and the team. What was really interesting with Rebecca Green's case too, when you all found the file and were able to open it, the detective actually had I guess kind of just the thought to save some of her hair.
Yeah.
So some of her hair was actually put in a little baggie and in the file. Which at the time, not sure why they would have done it at the time per se, but now you can go back and there's technology. I think it's called MVAC,
right?
Where you can actually separate DNA strands. So they obviously know the hair is Rebecca's, but if the person that killed her touched her hair or
dragging her by her hair or
Yeah.
anything that would have transferred his DNA
onto
her hair,
they can
they
separate
might
it
be
now.
able to separate it. And so this was what happened behind the scenes with that file too was really interesting. So we were there. I was there when you did the interview with Sergeant Jansen.
Yeah.
And when you're going through the cases, when you talk about Rebecca Green, you're asking questions, and he's like, "Well, we're gonna have to check the file. Well, I need to look into that. I didn't get a chance to study it." They couldn't find Rebecca Green's file at the time. You left. Clint had just started working with us. Yeah, day 2. We're kind of showing him the ropes about these stories that we helped with, and so Sergeant Jansen offered to show Clint the cold case office, the vault, all the stuff that we've seen before on TV and that you've seen. And he's explaining to Clint this file system in the cold case office. And he's going, each one of these, I can't remember how many years, 30 years of case files in this one section. And Sergeant Jansen opens the drawer. He reaches in to show Clint what the size of a case file from that year was. And the case file won't come out. It's just, they're packed so tight in there. And he closes that one and reaches over and opens another drawer, reaches in randomly and pulls out a case file and goes, "So this is about the size of a case file." And at the same time, Sergeant Jansen and I look down and it says Rebecca Ann Green on the case. And I mean, it gave me chills then. It gives me chills now. We had just left that initial interview with you about that case.
Where they hadn't been able to locate the file.
Where they had not been able to locate the file. It had been misfiled in the year they
found her body.
They found her body, not when she disappeared. And he just completely randomly, that was not supposed to be the file he took out. He tried to take out another file and it was wedged in there. So he just closed it, opens, grabs another file, and that's it. Yeah. It was one of the strangest things I've ever seen. Yeah, I have 30 years of case files, and he randomly pulls the one out that we were just talking about and that had been missing. So that was kind of one of those interesting stories that most people don't.
And that's how they found the hair and all the information.
And then the hair and all the information. Like I said, I know that some people had reached out about some similar experiences back then about a car pulling up and trying to get them in. The sheriff's office released this intelligence bulletin. This was even prior to Rebecca missing, and quite honestly, I'm sure they were sending this out to every single agency in the area, around the area, trying to figure out if any other girls that matched these descriptions had gone missing, or it was it was really hard to go back and look at some of the. I mean, these are children.
Yeah.
I have a daughter. You are a daughter. Yeah. I mean, it was hard, but to know that there people were watching this segment in the series that you did, and they were trying to help however they could, coming forward saying that they were,
had at least maybe been approached by somebody back then.
Yeah.
And I mean, you never know what the clue will be. So, I mean, if you are watching the series or this crime, any crime, you have information, even if you think it's small, they always encourage you to come forward because, I mean, you might be the link that remembers something that brings all of these kind of together.
Yeah. It was interesting when when Bundy tried to abduct the girl, her brother pulled up and was able to, and he had the partial plate or a plate that went with the van or whatever it was that Bundy was driving.
Because their father's a detective.
So he had trained them, and so they actually helped in convicting Bundy in that Leach case from Lake City. And, it's hard to imagine that anybody would remember a tag number now from back then. But, I mean, there were multiple cars that were described in some of these cases, whether it was the white car at the Anderson sisters or the bug.
Or a blue bike with
the blue bike.
Jeannie Schoen.
Yeah, with Jeannie Schoen. Imagine that was, I don't know if Jeannie had an older brother or a cousin that maybe lived with them or something, and maybe he was supposed to be watching her and she snuck out. Whatever the situation was, if it was an innocent situation, it would be important for that person to come forward and say, that was me that day, and this is what happened. I was supposed to be watching her. I went to the bathroom and she took off, and when I found her, I yelled at her and I screamed at her, and and that's why she was crying. That's why I took her home. That would be important information, because right now it doesn't look like that. Right now it looks like you were doing something really bad.
And it kind of throws off the way they can put the pieces together. So if they can eliminate certain things, then that of course helps tighten the circle.
Exactly. All of these, well, not all of these yet, but most of these girls are in NamUs, which is the kind of the central database for missing and unidentified persons within the country, and one is not in there yet. I can't remember which one it is, but I remember contacting JSO and letting them know that one had not been, and
hadn't been admitted yet.
I also had looked at NamUs when we were doing these stories to see if there was anybody else in that same time frame that was maybe in Georgia, South Georgia, or somewhere else. And couldn't find anybody else, but there was like a 16-year-old girl that went missing from Jacksonville like 2 years earlier than that.
Yeah.
But there didn't seem to be any of the same, characteristics, mainly being this was a 3-month span. Again, this was from July 21st until mid-October.
Yeah.
That.
And then it just stops. That's the weird part too. And we asked him, like, well, what do you think? I mean, what do you think happened? And you never know, because it could be, maybe it was, if it was one person, maybe they moved on to somewhere else because suddenly it was front page headlines. Front page news, yeah. There was suddenly a lot of pressure, and people were starting to get very afraid and watching their kids a lot closer. So maybe that person moved on, or maybe if they weren't connected, maybe the groups of people didn't stay. They were transient. You don't know. But it just suddenly, after Rebecca, stops. It stops,
yeah. And I mean, this is a graphic that Clint did in our office, to kind of put them all together. Because none of those newspaper clippings were available online when you did this story. You went to
had to go through the microfilm.
The microfilm at the main library in downtown Jacksonville. Yeah. And search for dates. And
shout out to the people out there who helped me go through it.
To help you go through it. I mean, these just like you said, article after article, but not really at the forefront until
they were kind of buried.
Kind of buried till later on. The reward fund, that was interesting. I guess Crime Stoppers wasn't around in 1974, but Jeannie Schoen's family had a $1,000 reward. Virginia Helm's family had come up with a $1,000 reward. And City Council had proposed a $5,000 reward for resolution to all the cases.
Right.
I'm obviously assuming they're all connected, but those rewards
unfortunately never led to arrests.
Didn't lead to arrests. I don't know. It was one of those things. As looking back through that, I remember the first time these cases kind of caught my eye. There was a story about people talking. I think the Times Union did it about. We live in such a different time now where it's not safe for kids. It was probably around the time, almost 10 years ago now, when Summer Thompson went missing here locally. And there had been Maddie Clifton, years before that. And there's this perception that we live in a very dangerous time where your kids can't play by themselves. And this whole article was about, but we went back and looked at through some old records and found these 5 that had gone missing in 1974 in a much tighter time frame, and so it's I think that the perception is that this didn't happen back then, but it did, and this is the
it
perfect
just didn't
example.
get the publicity the same way.
It didn't. It couldn't. There was no social media.
There's no Amber Alerts.
There was no Amber Alerts. There was. There literally was, and I was reading another article. There was probably one news station in town back then, maybe two,
in the 70s.
In the 70s, and they didn't go to on site and do a story. They would send out a cameraman, get some footage, bring it back to the studio.
Right, like live capabilities. Just
yeah, it wasn't really a thing. So the newspaper, there was no social media, so it wouldn't have been in the paper until next day at best. If they knew what was going on, it could be a couple days later. So that's what was very different about the times.
Yeah.
I don't. To my knowledge, there has not been 5 young girls go missing in such a tight span.
Never that I've heard of.
since.
And a lot of the reporters, when I brought this story up to our reporting staff, like Ken Amaro, he's been on our team for 30 plus years. Jeannie's been there for almost 30 years. They all could not remember these things ever happening, like people ever talking about it again after this summer. And something like this ever happening again.
I went, and it was today. I was trying to do some research to refresh my memory. I couldn't remember when Rebecca's remains were found, and so I was doing some search online, and it was like nothing, after until those remains were found 3 years later, and then there was an article that they had been identified,
and then that was it.
And then it goes kind of silent again. And as you know, our organization is here to try to make sure that these victims and their faces are never forgotten, even when their parents pass away, like Jeannie Schoen, and when they're the Anderson sisters, who still have a sister who, her parents are gone. She was young, herself. She was the oldest sister, I believe, but she was she's still a kid at the time.
She was only maybe 12, 13.
Yeah. So, they deserve answers. They deserve to know that someone out there still knows that their loved one's missing or gone or was killed, and that we're trying to help resolve those. And, hopefully, JSO has been able to make some headway in that at some point, and we'll be able to get a further update. For us, it's just another opportunity to shine a light on these things, at another time. So, Clint, do we have anybody ask anything specific? No. All right. Well, I thought we were going to be here for hours getting into this.
We contained ourselves.
Ourselves. Well, part of it is we want to share the actual videos that you did, in the comment section, so that people that maybe missed them back in May can go through and watch each of them. And like I said, each of them is about 3.5 to 5 minutes.
It depended on how much information we had. Yeah. How long they were.
And so, we didn't want to make everybody sit through them
for 20
continuously for 20 minutes. But we want you to be able to go back and see those and reference those. So we're going to post those in the comments. I think you have another unsolved segment coming up this week.
Yes.
Right?
So we have we've had 4 this month, and this is the last one of this kind of round. It'll air tomorrow night at 11 o'clock on First Coast News, and it is a Clay County case from 2007. So about 12 years ago, and it was a double murder at a house in Middleburg. A 16-year-old and a 21-year-old that were killed. Chelsea and Matt were their names, and it's kind of walking back through what happened that night. They believe they were killed sometime between midnight and 2 a.m., but very brutally, very close range. They say this was, a very brutal crime. But there's new technology now that they're really hoping will make a difference, specifically with fingerprint technology, because their scene, unfortunately, was kind of cleaned up before police got there by other people who were at the scene or found the scene. So that always posed a problem. And so that's part of what the Unsolved looks into tonight, is why the scene was tampered with, and then how technology is kind of helping them overcome what was such a huge problem back then, how that new technology is really helping them move forward now.
All right. Well, good. That'll be tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night at 11 o'clock
p.m. on First Coast News. We did just get a comment from Virginia's sister asking when will DNA be complete on the duffel bag found in Virginia's case, and I don't
think we have a date specifically.
Yeah, I don't know what was submitted and what order and how long on these cases. We will, if you can reach out to us privately, though, we can make sure that the detectives get back with you and maybe get an update for you on that. I would think that if it had been done,
because these stories aired a year ago and they were about to submit it, so probably if it's not been done already, it would.
Yeah, and I think it complicates that there were 5 cases each that had their own evidence. That some didn't have a lot of evidence, I'm sure, that was being submitted, but I don't know what order they were doing it, if they were lumping them all in as one single investigation or if they were handling this
in multiple steps.
But that's some information we can probably find out. My hope is that it hasn't been submitted yet, because I would assume if it had been submitted and come back with positive news, we would have heard something. But hopefully it's in the process of being tested, and we can get back. But
do send Project Cold Case a message, though, because I believe they were trying to get in touch with other family members.
Yeah, exactly. Some of these cases, law enforcement couldn't find family members, or they had family members that had since passed away, or had phone numbers that were from 1974. So you can always send info@projectcoldcase.org is a good email address that you can send anything to. That we will make sure that information gets to the right place. If you have information on these cases that could help resolve them, I recommend you not send it to us, but send it directly to the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office or Crime Stoppers here locally, where you would be eligible for a reward up to $3,000 and could remain anonymous in those cases. So keep that in mind if you do have information. One of these things we deal with when we're talking about these older cases, 1974. While we've seen some resolved where there was where the suspect was still alive, there's a chance we're getting to that point where there's a chance that somebody may not be alive anymore. Now, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't figure it out and be able to clear it and identify who that was, and so the family knows. But that's always a fear.
You may not be able to arrest someone. You'll be able to solve it, but not arrest someone.
Yeah, and if somebody's passed away, you won't have that moment in court, but it's still important, so we do that. Thanks for joining us again, Katie.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to having you again maybe next month, and we'll pick another one and talk a little bit more about it and dive into some details. Again, tomorrow night, 11 p.m.
First Coast News.
Their Unsolved segment from down in Clay County. We just did one
last week on Melissa Ellison.
Which was a local one. So those are always good, and you have those on your site, on the First Coast News site. I think I saw you have an unsolved.
We have an unsolved section I believe,
now.
Under features.
Yeah. So check those out. Go back and watch them on our website, projectcoldcase.org. A lot of times we'll share them in the news section of our website. We link back to them so that we're always trying to get as much information out there as possible. If you can share them on your social media pages, again, we don't need to reach 1 million people. We need to reach the right one, but we may have to go through 1 million to get there. So every time it's shared or commented on, reaction, engagement on those posts is one step closer to reaching the right person, and that's ultimately what we want to do. We have also a YouTube channel that we're working on that is all of these Facebook Lives that we do,
good.
And we're just downloading them to one place so that if somebody comes along today and they want to go back and look at the ones we've done in the past, that they can do that. We'll get that link. We'll share that in the comment section as well. But other than that, thanks a lot, Katie.
Bye. Thank you so much for having me. And check out Unsolved tomorrow night at 11.
Perfect. All right. We'll see you guys next week.